Hello. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the Socratic seminar questions that I came up for Beloved. So I focused on two questions. The first one was, did I believe that Steve and her mother acted appropriately when faced with adversity? And so when answering this question, I looked at two factors: what their actual action was in the face of adversity, and their motives behind it. So looking at Seed's story, Seed's story, starting from chapter 16, we begin to understand that she's lived as a product of slavery and has lived the consequences of slavery her whole life. She knew that her mother had suffered from slavery. She saw her work and she saw her imprint, and she saw her be killed in her early childhood years. And then as she grows older, she still experiences slavery, and she's whipped, which leads to the chokeberry tree, and she's raped, and her breast milk is stolen, which it also shows how slavery robbed her of motherhood. So she knows what pain is, and she doesn't know any other sort of life outside of slavery. So she doesn't have the same optimism that we would have, or hope that we know, knowing that we are free. So when she sees that her children are about to be captured and taken into slavery by the slave owners, and by the school teacher, she feels fear, and she feels love, and she feels desperation. So looking at it from that critical viewpoint of understanding that it wasn't an act of hate or an act of revenge, but rather of love, we understand a little bit more of why Seed did what she did. On a separate note, Seed's mother, starting from chapter 6, we begin to see that she didn't always live her life in slavery. She was actually transported on a ship to be sold as a slave, where she was raped several times, and that's when she understood that slavery was bad, so she killed her children in an effort to sort of rid herself of slavery. However, she had Steve with a black man, so that was still part of her identity and her culture, and so she kept Steve alive. And I think that it's important to note that the distinction that exists between the two of having killed your children and keeping your children alive, because Seed's mother, again, she knew that there was something else in this world besides slavery. She understood the goodness that could exist outside of it. So she gave her daughter the chance of that. My second question was, who or what does Beloved represent? And I came up with two answers for this. It could either be Seed's dead child or the institution of slavery. We see in chapter 9 that Beloved physically and literally takes the place of Seed's dead child by choking Seed, and she left bruises on her throat, which further prove this. And so that sort of parallels Seed's act of cutting Beloved's throat. And so following that central theme of the guilt of motherhood and what comes of that, Beloved represents the actual person of Beloved. And all of this physical representation of Beloved leads us to ask the question of, what is motherhood, in the way that we see that Seed is suffering, and to what extent can a mother protect her children, which sort of ties into my first question about the face of adversity. In my second answer, I talked about the institution of slavery. So in chapter 26, we see that Beloved becomes ever more dominant in the lives of Seed, of Paul D, and of Denver, and in her relationships with each character, she begins to break their own respective relationships with each other. So, for example, when he's seduced by Beloved, Paul D breaks his relationship with Seed out of guilt and out of confusion. And similarly, Seath loses her job because she becomes so consumed with Beloved, and that leads to near starvation of her family, which of course breaks sort of the bond that she had with Denver. And so by the actual breaking of this whole relationship family structure, Beloved is actually representing the institution of slavery, which does a very similar thing when people are sold or killed by their slave owners. And those are my answers and questions. Thank you and good night.